Shalom and greetings again, friends. For those of you out there who know me or have watched my YouTube video teachings regarding Elul 29 and the fourth blood moon, well, I do have some humble pie to eat, as I said I would. And I went out to my local Safeway on the preparation day yesterday before Shabbat, and I got myself a humble pie here. And I wrote the big letter H in pink, which is even a more humble color for me to choose for myself, because I've got to eat some of this. But it's so thick in the letter H, I was going to write out the whole word humble, but I forgot to buy the adapter for the icing, the decorating for the icing. So I couldn't write little thin letters, so I just put the big letter H. I think you get the point. And here's a little piece I've already cut out. So I'm going to eat a little bit of this humble pie publicly on YouTube here with this video teaching, and I'm going to do a little bit explanation afterwards. Pretty good. If you're going to eat humble pie, make sure it tastes good. Now this looks a little bit more like a cake, maybe. I went to the pie section. I was going to pick a nice chocolate mousse pie, but this one, this cream pie. Nice cream pie. And how about if I just put this right out here? Keep this here through my video teaching. Now, however, even though I do need to eat a little bit of humble pie here, and if you want some, and you want to come to San Jose, California, you live close enough, or you want to take a plane flight and have some of this humble pie with me, you're welcome to. Just let me know. Or you can get your own. But I must say that I was not overly dogmatic. If you watch my video teachings again carefully, I wasn't overly dogmatic, but very confident. I was confident more personally than even I expressed on my YouTube video teachings, that there would be some kind of big U.S. economic crash between Elul 29, that was September 14th, and 2015 here, up until the end of the feast of Sukkot and that 8th day on October 6th, as I observed it according to the Creator's calendar, and perhaps possibly even caused by catastrophic natural disasters here in the United States. Again, remember I said that big two-letter word, the big letter two-letter word is if. IF, if our Creator wants to wind things down very quickly during this time period, matching up with some of these very unusual, I think we all must admit there's some very, very unusual phenomenons in regard to the timing of history, regarding the history of the United States here, and regarding drawing such conclusions based upon The Harbinger by Jonathan Cahn. And most of you have probably watched that video, and all the phenomenons that have happened in 2001, the 9/11, and then 8 years later, 2008. And he goes back in history even through the 20th century, back to the Great Depression, and how these Shemitah years, these 7-year time cycles, can be judgments of curses, or it can be blessings, as he's pointed out. He also has a teaching on the mystery of the Shemitahs by Jonathan Cahn. And as he points out, these are templates, not exact dates. He did warn that we shouldn't set exact dates of judgments. And there's also the blood moons, the fourth blood moon that happened right at the beginning of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles this year, real close to it, not exactly, but pretty close to it. And Mark Blitz and Biltz, I should say, Mark Biltz with El Shaddai Ministries up in Washington, and things have gone viral with his teachings and others who have taught on these 4 blood moons and the history of that, and how it always seems to parallel a lot of bloodshed for the Israeli people. And notice how we've been having a lot of bloodshed happening with the Palestinians since that 4th blood moon. It could be just triggering things to come. And not that things have to happen very quickly, but sometimes spread out from that starting point of when these things can be triggered and initiated, or we could say inaugurated. But many others like myself did carry some of this information a little bit too far. Maybe even farther than Jonathan Cahn and Mark Biltz and some of these others. I can't judge for you, but I'm judging for myself. That's why I have this humble pie. I figured something bigger would happen to the U.S. economy, or maybe perhaps the U.S. soil during this time period. But let me just remind you of some of the disclaimers that Jonathan Cahn did put out there, that some of us out there didn't listen to well enough. He said that we shouldn't put God into a box. He did say that. He said nothing has to happen on Elul 29, but look at the patterns. The last 2 only were right on Elul 29. And most of them in the history beforehand weren't exactly on Elul 29, but he thought that's interesting and something to watch. And is something going to happen on this next Elul 29 on the end of the Shemitah year? So, he did say we shouldn't be too dogmatic regarding setting dates. And I wasn't actually setting dates too dogmatically either, but was a little bit, precautious. I think it's wise to be precautious and not to just go into debt or to break any of our Creator's commandments because we have too much fear. But if we set dates or expectations based upon our Creator's calendar, his biblical calendar, or the Shemitah years, or the feast dates, sometimes we could put him into a box, and sometimes he might want to change his mind on things, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But one of the more dogmatic predictions, I should say, from Jonathan Cahn was the U.S. economic crash between September and October. And although things have happened with the Chinese market and some other European markets, and he's pointed out that there is some things that have happened, but not so much on the U.S. yet. So there's been some ups and downs and some warnings, or we could say a harbinger is a warning, but little triggers, little warning signs. And October isn't over yet, since as I'm recording this video teaching, we still got about another week ahead. But still, there's this time frame of expectation that has been set, and Jonathan Cahn did say sometimes our Creator skips Shemitah years for one reason or another. But with the U.S. laws, our laws in the United States of America getting a little bit more liberal, we see less support for Israel and more support of those who are trying to wipe Israel off the face of this planet. Well, these are kind of things that kind of also stimulated some of us to think, well, maybe something big's going to happen in this time frame at the end of this Shemitah year, a shaking. As Jonathan Cahn keeps saying in his video teachings, a shaking upon America very soon. And so let's just keep watching and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it's an idiom that, the baby's good, the baby's clean. But if a little bit of dirty water involved, let's just get rid of the dirty, unclean stuff, and let's focus on what is good and what is true in our Word, and not just throw out everything that is good. But not myself. I shouldn't say myself in this regard, but there was feast keepers, people keeping our Lord's feast, the Creator's feast. During this time period, would just stay home. They had so much fear. They stayed home. They would not gather. as commanded with those whom they could gather with and worship with more with. And I know there's a scripture that says when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, and even in Judaism when you have 10, you have a minyan. But sometimes if we have too much fear, and I've heard that some people wouldn't even gather and worship with others on these times, there was so much fear. And so due to perhaps too much wrong fear of catastrophic natural disasters or terrorist acts, perhaps our Creator sees this lack of faith in those keeping his feast with the wrong kind of fear, and as well as some of these prophecy-based ministries out here that have taken advantage of this to build their ministry with pushing a lot of the wrong kind of fear. And sometimes fear can bring us to repentance, and the fear of the Lord, it says in Proverbs 1:7, is the beginning of knowledge. It kind of gets people to wake up a little bit. And not that it's all wrong, but sometimes we don't have it balanced out right. But this can upset our Creator if we're not balanced right. And if we're developing the wrong kinds of fears, going overboard with the wrong kinds of fears, and influencing him to postpone. Maybe he was influenced to postpone a massive U.S. economic crash. We can still see these warning signs that it's coming ahead. A big bubble's about ready to burst. And nothing really big happened to U.S. soil, but look what's happening close to U.S. soil. Could be little warning signs as well. We had a huge 8.4 earthquake in Chile during this end of the Shemitah year. Right now, as I'm recording this, there's a huge, one of the worst storms in history of hurricanes down in Mexico, down in South America, just south of our border there, 200-mile-an-hour winds. Wow. I can't even fathom that, what it's like to experience that. And the pressure dropping so low in the eye of that storm is unprecedented that I know about. So there are things happening around us to warn us, even with, like I said, other stock markets close to and related to the United States as little harbingers, maybe. Not that, these are huge things happening to us locally, but we should not, and let me repeat again, we should not expect or worry about horrific things to happen during our Creator's Moedims, as we say in Hebrew, his appointed times, his feast, his Sabbaths. We say Shabbat. We're told that similarly to this, and relative to this, in Matisyahu, or we say Matthew, chapter 24:20, the Moshiach, Yehoshua, aka Jesus, he says here, and pray that your flight be not in the winter or on a Shabbat day, which is another clear commandment here, that his Shabbats are not to be moved and changed by us. We don't have the power or authority to change these things, so we're to pray that they don't happen at these times. And there's always oxes in the ditch, and it's okay to save lives, of course, but he's just throwing that out there, I believe, as basically a statement that we have no authority or power to change the winter, the times of the seasons. You may want to play God or think that we are on the same plane as God, and that he's given us the power or authority to do that, but we can't change the seasons or the Sabbaths. Or perhaps our Creator was planning a huge economic crash or even a natural catastrophic disaster during this time. And even though there's been little earthquakes in Hayward, in San Ramon, or not say Hayward, but San Ramon area, close to the Bay Area, those of you in the Bay Area here, over the last week, little tiny ones, multiple ones. Now, is that just relieving pressure, or is that going to snowball or domino effect into a big shift, a plate shift? And about a month ago, and more through the summer. We had some of those little ones happening up in Berkeley, a little bit northwest. And so around the Bay Area, we're starting to see little tiny earthquakes. And could those be little warning signs? Don't get too haughty. Don't get too arrogant, because nothing big is happening. But, you know, maybe some people with righteous character are praying about these things, holding things off. I can't speak for him, and I'm not going to put him into a box, but we can see that our Creator has changed his mind in the Scriptures. Did you know that? Look at Abraham. Remember Abraham? He interceded for Sodom. And he said, oh, if there's 50 righteous ones, will you destroy all these even for 50 righteous ones? And Creator said, no, I won't do it for 50. And then he keeps talking them all the way down to 10. And that's where we get the word 10 for a minion or a group or more. 10 or more, he said he wouldn't destroy Sodom. And he went down there, and the angels couldn't find 10 men, and so brought Lot out and his family, those who would go with him. But it was interesting, you know, that righteous people can reason with our Creator and even alter or postpone or change his mind. Even Moses, when we say Moshe, remember when he interceded to rescue ancient Israel out there in the wilderness, as we see in Exodus. We say Shemot. In Hebrew 32, verses 9 through 14. Let me just read this in case you're unfamiliar with this. It says, and the Creator, that Yud-He-Vav-He, the holy name, said to Moshe, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Stiff-necked, stubborn. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and that I may consume them. He was wanting to wipe out Israel, even our Creator at this time. He was so upset. And I will make you, and he's speaking to Moshe, a great nation. He's going to start it all over through Moshe, like he did through Noah with the flood. Then Moshe pleaded with our Creator and said, so, you know, he pleads with him and said, wow, are you going to bring your people out and just kill them? How are we going to end up, how are the Gentiles going to look at that? How are you going to save them eventually? He knew the plan, and he was able to reason with our Creator and saying that's not the best way to save the world here. And he offered himself. Moshe became like a type of Moshiach, willing to sacrifice himself for the people. Great story, and of course we see our Creator changing his decision there on what he told Moshe he was going to do. Jonah, one more example here. Jonah prophesied to Nineveh. Remember this. We see this, you can read this for yourself. In Jonah, we say Yonah. In Hebrew, it also means dove. Interesting. Peace. Dove is a symbol of peace. Shalom. In Jonah 3, verses 3 and 4, it says, so Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of Yud-He-Vav-He, his holy name. I'm just giving you the Hebrew letters there. And, you know, it was 3 days' journey. Interesting. Number 3 again here, to walk just through this Nineveh. Not a tiny little place here. And Jonah began to enter the city on the first day. He just, right on the first day, 3 days to walk through it. And he cried out and said, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown, with an exclamation mark. Wow. Didn't happen. Read the story. When the people repented, they fasted. Their animals fasted, and they wanted to cleanse and purify their animals, probably involved with all kinds of pagan practices and bestiality, who knows what. But they just wanted to cleanse everything and went above and beyond any call of duty that we even see in repentance here, even with the animals. And so we can see that's a great example that even when sometimes a prophet prophesies something, It doesn't always happen, and it's not just because he changes, but he sees a change in the people. And that's what I'm proposing to you with this Elul 29 and fourth blood moon. We see a lot of little signs, but it's not as bad as many of us were expecting, and maybe it could have been. But all this preaching and getting this out there has waken up a lot of people. And as Jonathan Cahn even said, if there's something not right in your life, get it out. Just get rid of it. If it's not in alignment with his word and his truth and in character, which is based upon his commandments, teaches his love, how to love him and how to love everybody else, and including we got to love ourselves in the right ways without going overboard with that. Having the right balance with the scriptures, a lot of people have been changing, and that's good. Maybe our Creator said, okay, some of you have been praying for another 7 years to preach the gospel, to bring people to righteousness and to repent, and well, let's give it some more time. I don't know. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. I'm just saying we see a lot of evidence that we shouldn't just get discouraged because nothing big happens. Some people out there, we need to eat humble pie, as I'm saying here, but also realize that, we don't just have to give up our faith, or this shouldn't deter our faith in his word, his commandments of righteousness, and his 10 commandments, as he wrote with his own finger, and not just 9 or 8 of them, or all 10. And then even the statutes and judgments kind of are subtitles, sub-commandments that are relative to those 10. So the big picture is we must increase our faith. And even those of you out there who wouldn't gather together with others that you could have on these Moedims, increase your faith and pray and realize that he can bless the timing of it. And he's not going to do it on his holy Moedims if we're gathering and praying. If he is, he can part the sea. He can do any miracle he wants. He can put an invisible force field around us. We could be his invincibles. You see that movie, The Invincibles? The Untouchables? Elliot Ness, The Untouchable. We could be his untouchables, his invincibles, if we're righteous enough. And remember, in my YouTube video teaching, just a quick reminder, when I went to James chapter 5 and verses 16 and 17, where it said Eliyahu, he had human nature just like ours. He was not some perfect spirit being. He had human nature. He wasn't perfect, and yet he was righteous. And he prayed, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years, and then he prayed for it to rain, and it rained. So we see miracles can happen. Don't give up just because we're wrong about some things. Also in Matisyahu, we say Matthew chapter 17 verse 20. I went to that and said, with the faith of a mustard seed, if we can move mountains, why can't we move the timing of events with prayer? And if there's a reason and a good purpose, and it can fit within his will and his plan for humanity on this earth, why should we give up on these things? We can move mountains, do miraculous things. I also talked about in Psalms 91. Again, supernatural, divine protection as his invincibles, his untouchables. And I won't read those again, but, just as little reminders. If you haven't watched those videos, go back and watch it. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not going to just take it off the internet. You can see it for yourself, what I was saying before Elul 29, and what I also recorded as part 2. And just after Elul 29, when nothing really big happened, but we were still during this time period before October 6th, 2015. And of course, since nothing big or bad has happened to the U.S. economy yet, Elul 29, especially during this time period, I was about 99% confident, I should say. I personally expected it, didn't quite preach it so dogmatically, but I must eat humble pie. And how about another piece here? If you're going to do it, make it taste good. And it may not be good for you physically all the time, but it sure is good for you spiritually, right? So whatever you like, get a blueberry one, more antioxidants. But it's not so bad to eat humble pie, is it? Shouldn't be. Some people just can't seem to do it, and I want to set the example that we should do it and make it taste good and learn from the experiences, especially. Learn from it and enjoy these more peaceful times. I even said, hey, if nothing happens, I'm going to enjoy more peaceful times to get the gospel out there, to get the truth, to get the Torah. The gospel's right in the Torah. It's not some new thing invented by Christianity. It goes way back. You can read that even in Galatians 3 verse 10, I believe it is, where he says the gospel is preached to Abraham. We can go to Hebrews chapter 4 verse 1 and 2. The gospel was preached to Israel. And also in Romans 10, I think around verse 15 or so, somewhere around Romans 10, it says that the gospel of peace was preached to Israel. So it's not something that's going to do some kind of wholesale change and abolish the Torah, the written one. A big difference between what we say the Mosaic law and the Jewish law. The Jewish law is oral, Mosaic law is written. And so, there could be some similarities in there, but there is also differences that we need to understand as believers in the Word. So, in conclusion, let me also put out a little warning that beware of scoffers in the last days. You've got to beware of these scoffers. It says in 2 Peter, we say Kepha, chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, it says, above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come. In these last days, scoffers will come. What are they going to say? Well, it says here, scoffing and following their own evil desires. Okay, here's a clue. Just evil, they're following their own evil desires. In other words, they're not obeying the word here. The Torah, the instructions. Well, how do we define evil? How do you define evil? You can just do it on your own understanding? Or do what's right in your own eyes? Or are you going to let the Word define what is evil, what is good, and what is evil? Because it also says elsewhere in the end times that they will call good evil, and they'll call evil good. So beware of that. These scoffers are going to have those characteristics. And they will say, where is this coming that he promised? Where is it? Ever since our ancestors have died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. Or they'll just say, these things keep happening. People predict. You've got prediction addictions, and not just Hebrew roots or Messianic believers, but you could go back to Adventists predicting the return of Jesus in 1844. We've got many different forms of Christianity predicting the tribulation, the Great Tribulation, the return of the Messiah. A lot of predictions out there. But hey, just because these things have continued, also earthquakes and pestilences, people say, oh, these things are just normal, they happen. Yeah, there's catastrophic ones, but doesn't mean we're at the end. And so there's going to be scoffers saying these things. And there's going to be some truth to that. Yeah, these things have been continuing. Our Creator, and that's what we got to remember, His mind is more circular. It's not so linear. Our human minds tend to be linear. And boom, okay, that happened. And okay, that's done. Boom, okay, we like to draw these linear timetables. But our Creator likes cycles and history repeating itself. We see the abomination of desolation happening a number of times in history right there in Jerusalem, in Israel. We see the abomination of desolations happening with the temple, mount there, and with the temple. Not just once. We have the Hanukkah story. We have 70 CE, and also the destruction of the first temple. So we could see that our Creator, He intensifies things as they go. But, we just shouldn't say it's all done in history and it's not going to happen again. We can rationalize a lot, and this is where we do need to eat humble pie when we go overboard or we misunderstand things or say things inaccurately. Because eventually, the dung will hit the fan. As another idiom there, the dung will hit the fan, and end time prophecies will speed up quickly. Very quickly. If you don't know your word, then you probably don't. If you're not familiar with it, it's also referred to Jacob's trouble or the worldwide great tribulation. We see it 5 times in the scriptures here. Notice in Jeremiah 30, verse 7. It says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. That shall be the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." So it's going to be like the worst time in human history. So it was the Holocaust in the 1940s. Well, we could go to the Hanukkah story, read the Maccabees. Wow. Maybe not such great numbers that were butchered and tortured and slaughtered, but it is horrible. Just, it might make you vomit just looking at the details of that bloody history. But he's saying here that it'll be the worst time. And would I propose to you that has not happened yet? Because when it happens, it'll be right at the end when the Mashiach comes and saves the world and becomes the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Notice in Ezekiel, also it says in Ezekiel 5 verse 9, it says, "And I will do among you what I have never done." Let me say before. Let me throw in the word before. "And the like in which I will never do again." So you won't let this is going to be so bad, the worst time in history that will not be repeated. And it says, because. Why? Is it because he doesn't love his people, his chosen people anymore? No, it says because of your abominations. Because we tend to want to reject or abolish his instructions. In Hebrew, the word instructions or teachings is simply Torah. Some people just think law, and they like to say negatively and make it sound like it's a bad thing. But it's good. It's in his instructions, his blueprints to how to live according to his will and his way, his character, his mind, his love is how we define it. Now notice as it continues here. Oh, let me go to Daniel, our third one here. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, "And at that time Michael shall stand up." Here, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And he's been assigned over watching Israel, the high archangel here. "And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time." So again, here we're talking about the same time period here, the worst time in human history, the worst time for his people Israel. Now there's 2 times in the Brit Hadashah. We say the New Covenant writings that are parallel with the 3 that we see in the Tanakh, or as many call the Old Testament. 5 altogether, interesting number again too. But in Mattisyahu, right around that period where it says, "Pray that your flight be not in a winter or on a Sabbath day," it says, "For then there shall be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time." This is Yahushua, aka Jesus, speaking here. "No, never will there shall be He says, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Very parallel to Daniel, Ezekiel, and Jeremiah. In Revelation, we see that there's hope, there's protection. Do you want to be protected from this time period? There's a promise here, a bona fide promise if you have the Philadelphia. There's 7 spirits, 7 attitudes, 7 congregations. We can say 7 stars, 7 lampstands. There's a lot of symbolism in this book. He says, because you have kept my command, my mitzvah, to persevere. I also will keep you from the hour of trial which will come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. So we're talking about the same time period here. And as we should see that it will begin and it will happen very quickly, very suddenly. So we need to be ready. So what's been preaching on Elul 29, 4th blood moon, even though we need to eat a little humble pie, hopefully it stimulated us to get back to the Word, to start walking in His ways. Let's look at the positive big picture here. As our Messiah says here in Luke chapter 17, verses 26 through 33. And it says, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they got married. A lot of marriages happening. And they were given in marriage. It says, until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot. So he repeats the emphasis here of one day that's going to happen very quickly. Remember when Noah went into the ark, it was just happened, the rain started, it was too late. Once that day comes, if you're not in alignment with Him, it's going to be too late. If you don't have enough of that oil, there's the 5 wise virgins and the 5 foolish ones, the 10 altogether. We can go back to that parable as well. We have to be building our oil, which is symbolic of His Spirit, His truth, His righteousness. He says, likewise also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought. The economy was, normal economy. They sold, they planted. A lot of farming going on still. They built. But on the day, Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So if we're righteous, like I said, like Elijah and like the others, or like Lot was even kind of lukewarm here in this corrupt society, we can look at his example, and yet he was faithful enough, and the Creator sent angels, said, get out. And so we shouldn't just go by our own understanding or dates or, how things line up with biblical holy days or Shemitahs. But like I said, if we're going to go into huge debt, and nothing happens, well, the scriptures say don't go into debt. Or if we're not going to keep His Shabbats because we're too fearful that something's going to happen, we're disobeying Him out of fear. And that's what He doesn't want us to do. He wants us to do the opposite and become more obedient, more faithful. And faith without works is dead, as we see in James chapter 2. So our faith has to be backed up by our works, our obedience. And remember, in one day, both with Lot and with Noah here, it says, even so it shall be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. When it'll be revealed. Once the tribulation starts, we're going to know it's 360 days after that. It's going to be 3.5 years. And then it says here, remember Lot's wife. Remember she turned into a pillar of salt because she looked back? Maybe there was loved ones back there. We see that her sons-in-law didn't go with them. They got burned up. And whoever, friends and family, home, material possessions, whatever it was, she looked back in the wrong way. She disobeyed and turned into a pillar of salt as an example for us. And it says here, remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it. Sometimes we need to get right into the heat of these things and not just run and hide all the time. If it's not clear to do that, sometimes we do need to run and hide, and sometimes we need to be right there wherever he wants us to be, even though it's dangerous. And we have to really know what the difference between those two, because it says in Psalms. Let me also touch this on part 1 on Elul 29 and the 4th blood moon, but it says, I want to expound on the Hebrew a little bit in my conclusion here. It says it both in 2 places in Proverbs, not Psalms, sorry about that, Proverbs 22:3, and also in 27:12. It says, a prudent man foresees evil. You want to be a prudent person and foresee evil? And it says he hides himself or herself. But the simple, this is the King James translation, the simple pass on and are punished. Now, what does it mean to be simple? Because we want to stick to what's simple and what's plain and clear and obvious, but for those of you out there, Christians who like the Strong's number is 6612. It can be transliterated as peti. Or pehi. It's the Hebrew letters are the pe and the hey and the yud, however you want to pronounce that. But it can mean silly. The silly ones or the seductible ones. It says seductible or foolish. Foolish ones pass on and are punished, or they just kind of continue on, no big deal. Now this word, pehi, or however to pronounce that, there's different dialects, and again, the vowels weren't put in way back when this was written. We kind of plug in these vowels of what we think. Hebrew language became extinct for a while, and it's been restored through different dialects, through the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic and other similar dialects here. But notice the Strong's number, the root word comes from pata. Now that's the pei and the tav, and I think it's the hey at the end. But the tav and the hey, those of you who know Hebrew, just a little midrash you can do on your own, how similar those 2 letters are. So you look at these words, the root word is very similar. It can mean simple in a sinister way. Or to allure, to deceive, to entice, flatter, persuade, or simply silly. Silly ones. They're just silly. And we see an example of this in Lot's example, since I mentioned like in the days of Lot. If we go to Genesis chapter 19 verse 14, it says, so Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law. So his daughters married these young men, and so he speaks to them who had married his daughters and said, get up and get out of this place, for the Yud-He Vav-He, the holy name here, our Creator will destroy this city. But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. He just seemed to be silly. Not simple enough. There wasn't enough evidence to really prove to them that it was going to go down. They weren't apparently walking in alignment with him enough to hear his voice. They heard Lot's voice, but they didn't hear his voice speaking through it. So that's where we as sheep and the shepherd, the Mashiach, we should be able to hear his voice when the time comes, and not just go because we're fearful that we're going to die if we don't, but because simply we have to be close enough and do what he wants us to do. And sometimes he lets us do things that are wrong because it's going to help us spiritually. Eat a little humble pie is good for us, like I said sometimes. And we can't, all things work out for good in the end for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. You see that in Romans 8:28, one of my favorite memory verses, one of my first ones, when my faith really became strong in our Creator here. So last verse, in conclusion, here is, let's always remember what Yeshua warns us in Luke chapter 21, verse 36. As I've been saying, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, eat humble pie when we need to. But also remember, he says, watch, therefore. Notice it has to do with character building. When he says, and pray always that you may, that you and me, that we may, not a guarantee, not a once saved, always saved thing here. He says that you may be counted worthy to escape. Worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before who? The Son of Man.